Diane Mercer loaded her dead mother's quilts into the trunk of her car in the rain. The lock on the front door had been changed that morning. She'd found out when her key wouldn't turn. This was the house where she'd nursed her mother to her last breath, where she'd slept in a chair for 8 years, and now her brother had changed the locks like she was a stranger. She did not argue. She did not cry. She stacked the quilts, closed the trunk, and stood a moment in the rain. The worst of it came later, on the front lawn. They'd turned the funeral reception into an estate sale. 11 relatives stood around folding tables. Her sister Sharon was writing price tags for their mother's china. And Craig, her older brother, said it loud enough for all of them to hear. "The deed's got my name on it now, Di. You were never really family. You were the help." Nobody said a word. The rain kept coming. That night her phone lit up in the dark, a number she didn't know. Area code 202. Washington. A calm voice on the other end. "Ms. Mercer? I'm calling from Senator Vance's office. He's been trying to find you for a very long time." And then the voice paused, like it was choosing its words. "If you believe kindness never goes unnoticed, this story is for you." Before we go on, if stories like this one move something in you, take a second and subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you too. And do me a small favor. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I read everyone. Now, let's go back to the beginning. To a small diner in a small town and a woman who never once asked for anything back. Coldwater Bend, Ohio. You've driven through 100 towns like it and never slowed down. One traffic light, a hardware store, a church with a leaning steeple, and on the corner of Main and 6th, a diner with a hand-painted sign that reads Ruthie's. Diane Mercer opened that diner every morning before the sun came up. She was 52 years old. Her hands knew the work without being told. She'd flip the sign, start the coffee, and unlock the front door for a town that mostly took her for granted. The diner was named for her mother, Ruth. Ruth had built the place with her own 2 hands back when a cup of coffee cost a dime. She'd flipped eggs behind that counter for 40 years. And when Ruth got old and then got sick, it was Diane who stayed. Not Craig, not Sharon, Diane, 8 years. That's how long the sickness took to finish. It started small. Ruth would forget where she'd put her keys. Then she'd forget she owned a diner. Then, near the end, she'd forget her own daughter's face and ask Diane, sweetly, if she was one of the new waitresses. Diane fed her, bathed her, sat up with her through the long nights when Ruth got scared of the dark and didn't know why. She gave up 8 years. She gave up her savings, dollar by dollar, on medicine and home aids and the things insurance wouldn't touch. And she never once complained about it, not to a living soul. Craig sent flowers. Sharon sent a card. They came to the funeral in good coats. But Diane was the one who stayed. And she'd tell you, if you asked her, that staying wasn't a sacrifice. It was just what you did. You didn't leave the people you loved. You didn't count the cost out loud. That was Diane's whole way of moving through the world. Quiet, steady, giving. The paper boy came by every morning. A skinny kid named Petey, who rode a bike 2 sizes too small. Diane always tipped him more than the paper was worth. She'd fold a couple dollars into his cold hand and tell him to keep the change. And when it snowed, she'd wave him inside for a hot chocolate before he finished his route. 2 winters back, an ice storm shut down half the county. The road crew was out all night salting the hills, frozen to the bone. Diane kept the diner open past close and fed every last one of them. Eggs, bacon, coffee, pie, on the house. She wouldn't take a dime. The foreman tried to press $20 into her palm, and she folded his fingers back over it and told him to buy his kids something. That was Diane. She was always feeding strays. Her mother used to say it about her, half proud and half worried. That girl would give away the roof if you let her stand under it. Now there was one thing about Diane that even the town found a little strange. A small mystery that came around once a year. Every December, without fail, a card arrived at the diner. No return address, no name on the front. Inside, No long message, just a few words and a signature that was only a letter and a dot. A, that was all. Just A. It had been coming for 24 years. 24 Decembers, one card each. Diane would open it, read it, and set it up on the register with a small private smile that she never explained to anybody. Sharon thought it was ridiculous. Sharon thought most things about Diane were ridiculous. Whenever she happened to be in the diner and saw that card go up, she'd roll her eyes. "Your secret admirer again," Sharon would say. "Honestly, Diane, 24 years and you never once found out who it is? Some man's been mailing you love notes since we were young and you just what? Put 'em by the register?" Diane would just smile and wipe down the counter. "It's not like that." "Then what's it like?" But Diane never said. She just set the card up in its place and let the mystery stay a mystery. There was another thing, too. A thing Sharon didn't know about, because Diane never showed it to anyone. In her mother's old Bible, tucked between the thin pages near the back, Diane kept a folded slip of paper, a diner order ticket, yellowed now, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded over the years. On the front, faded pencil, an order for eggs and toast and coffee. Nothing special. But on the back, in a man's handwriting, pressed hard into the paper like it mattered, were 7 words. "I owe you one honest life. A.V." That was it. "I owe you one honest life." And the same initial as the card. A dot, and then a V. Diane had kept that ticket for 24 years. She never told anybody what it meant. Nobody ever asked, because nobody knew it existed. It just sat there in the Bible, quiet, waiting, the way some kindnesses wait a long, long time to be answered. But before we get to the answer, we have to get to the hard part. Because the world doesn't always pay a good person back right away. Sometimes it takes from them first. It started with the deed to the house. Now you have to understand how the Mercers came to own that house. Ruth had bought it 50 years ago, raised her 3 children in it, and always meant to leave it to all of them. Shared. Equal. That was the plan. Diane knew the plan. Everybody knew the plan. But in the last year, when Ruth's mind was already mostly gone, Craig came to the hospital with some papers. Diane remembered it, though at the time it hadn't seemed like anything. Ruth was propped up in the hospital bed, thin as a bird, staring at the wall. Craig had a folder. He was being gentle for Craig. He said it was just paperwork, just something to make things simpler down the road. "It's a quitclaim, Di," he'd said, sliding it across the tray table, "just to simplify probate. You know how the courts drag it out. This way there's no mess when the time comes. Everybody gets sorted out fair. You want that, right? You don't want Mom's estate stuck in some judge's drawer for 2 years." Diane had trusted him. He was her brother. Why wouldn't she trust him? She helped guide their mother's shaking hand to the line. Ruth signed something she couldn't have read or understood. And Diane, who was so tired that year, so worn down from the nights and the caregiving, didn't read every word of it either. She should have. Because that quitclaim didn't simplify anything for everybody. It signed the house over to 2 people, Craig and Sharon. Not Diane. Not the daughter who lived there and cared for the woman inside it. Just Craig and Sharon. Diane didn't find out until after the funeral. When she went to the county office to start sorting out the estate, the clerk pulled up the record, and Diane stood there reading it 3 times before it sank in. The house was appraised at $284,000, and her name wasn't on any of it. Now, why would Craig do a thing like that to his own sister? Here's the part the town didn't know. Craig Mercer was drowning. He'd fancied himself a property man for years, buying and flipping and always talking bigger than his bank account. His last deal was a strip mall out on Route 9 that never filled up. Half the storefronts sat empty. The bank was circling. Craig was $96,000 underwater, and the water was rising. He needed cash, and he needed it fast. And there was a house on Elm Street worth nearly $300,000, free and clear, with only one problem standing in the way of selling it. His sister was living in it. So Craig solved that problem the way men like Craig solve problems. Quietly, on paper, while nobody was looking. He gave Diane 30 days to get out. He didn't even tell her to her face at first. He had a lawyer send a letter. Diane read it standing at the diner counter, and the coffee she was pouring ran right over the rim of the cup, and she didn't notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. The premises, like it was a warehouse. Like it wasn't the room where she'd held her mother's hand at the end. She called Craig. He didn't pick up. She called Sharon. Sharon picked up, and she was breezy about it, which was almost worse. "Oh, Diane, don't make it a whole thing. The house has to be sold. It's just money sitting there doing nothing. You've got the diner. You'll land on your feet. You always do. This is just business." Mom would understand. Mom would understand. Diane hung up before she said something she'd regret. She didn't fight it. That's the thing you have to know about Diane. She didn't hire a lawyer, didn't make phone calls, didn't rally the family to her side. Part of it was money. She'd spent her savings on her mother and had almost nothing left. But part of it was just who she was. She believed, deep down, that if you did right by people, people saw it. That loyalty didn't have to be shouted. That the record would sort itself out because the truth was the truth. So she stayed quiet. And while she stayed quiet, Craig and Sharon wrote the record however they pleased. The 30 days ran down. And on the last of them, they did the cruelest thing yet. They held the estate sale on the day of the funeral reception. You heard that right. The same afternoon the family gathered to mourn Ruth Mercer. Craig and Sharon set up folding tables on the front lawn and started selling the woman's things. Her lamps, her dishes, her furniture. Priced with little stickers, laid out on the grass for strangers to paw through. 11 relatives were there. Aunts, cousins, an uncle down from Toledo. Half the town drifted by too, the way small towns do, drawn to the spectacle even when they know they shouldn't look. And it was raining. A cold, steady, gray rain that soaked everything. Diane came to say goodbye to the house. She'd been staying in the back room of the diner since the letter, sleeping on a cot, and she'd come back that day to gather the last of what was hers. Mostly her mother's quilts. Ruth had made them by hand over the years, and they were the one thing Diane wanted. Not the china, not the furniture, just the quilts her mother had stitched with her own fingers. Sharon was at one of the tables, and Diane watched her pick up their mother's wedding china. The good set. The one Ruth only brought out at Christmas. Sharon turned a plate over, found no maker's mark worth anything, and slapped a sticker on it. $8. She priced their mother's wedding china at $8. Diane didn't say anything. She just carried her quilts to the car, one armful at a time through the rain. That's when Craig saw his moment. He'd had a couple drinks. He was loud, and he wanted an audience, and he had one. 11 relatives and half the town. He planted himself on the porch of the house that used to be their mother's, and he called out to her across the yard. "You know, Di, I've been meaning to say something." His voice carried. People turned. The deed's got my name on it now. Mine and Sharon's. So this is our house, and this is our stuff. And you standing here taking things, that's kind of a problem, isn't it? Diane stopped. The rain ran down her face. She held a quilt against her chest. Craig smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "You were never really family, Di, not the way we were. You want to know the truth? You were the help. You cooked, you cleaned, you wiped Mom's chin. That's what you were good for. That's all you were." He spread his hands, taking in the lawn, the tables, the crowd. "So take your blankets and go." 11 relatives heard it. Nobody said a word to stop him. An aunt looked at the ground. A cousin found something fascinating about his shoes. The town watched. And Diane, who had every right to scream, who could have thrown the truth of those 8 years right back in his teeth in front of everyone, did none of it. She looked at her brother for a long moment. Then she turned, laid the last quilt in the trunk, closed it soft, and got in her car. She didn't slam the door. She didn't spin the tires. She just drove away, slow through the rain, back to the diner and the cot in the back room. She did not perform her pain. She never did. She carried it the same way she carried everything. Quietly, alone, and without asking anyone to help her hold it. That night, in the back room, she couldn't sleep. So she did what she always did when her mind wouldn't settle. She started sorting things, making order out of what she could. She had boxes back there, odds and ends she'd hauled out of the house before the locks changed, and among them was her mother's old Bible. Diane sat on the edge of the cot with it in her lap. She hadn't opened it in a while, and when she did, near the back, the folded ticket slipped out and landed on the floor. She picked it up, unfolded it, careful, at the soft creases, read the front. Eggs, toast, coffee, then turned it over and read the back, the way she had 100 times before. I owe you one honest life. A.V. And sitting there in the worst week of her life, with the house gone and her brother's words still ringing, Diane remembered. It came back to her all at once, 24 years ago. A winter as cold as any she could remember. She'd been young then, 28, working the counter for her mother, still living upstairs. And one night in November, a young man had come into the diner near closing. Thin, shivering, a coat too light for the weather. He couldn't have been more than 22, maybe 23. He sat at the far end of the counter and stared at the menu for a long time and didn't order anything. Diane knew the look. She'd seen it before. It was the look of someone counting the coins in his pocket and knowing they weren't enough. She'd poured him a coffee he didn't ask for and set it down and told him it was on the house. He tried to say no. She told him the pot was going to get thrown out anyway, which wasn't true, and she made him a plate of eggs and toast, and she wouldn't take a cent. He told her, over that plate, that his name was Andre, that he'd been on a bus headed east to a law school interview, the interview that was supposed to change his whole life, and that somewhere along the way his money had run out. Wallet stolen at a rest stop, he thought, or lost. He wasn't sure anymore. He was stranded in Coldwater Bend with a dead bus ticket and no way forward and no way back. He was sleeping in the bus shelter. He was terrified he was going to miss the interview and lose everything he'd worked for. He wasn't from around there. He was just a stranger passing through, a nobody nobody knew, a young man the town would have forgotten by spring. But Diane fed him. Not once. Every day. From November clear through to February. Whenever he drifted in, cold and hungry and ashamed of it, she put a plate in front of him and waved off the apology. She never made him feel like charity. She'd just say the kitchen made too much, or a customer sent something back, and slide it over like it was nothing. And on the day he finally had a way to leave, when a spot opened on an eastbound bus, Diane did one more thing. She reached into the coffee can where she kept her tip money, the money that was supposed to be hers, and she counted out $40 and pressed it into his hand for the ticket and told him to go get his life. $40. It was more than she could spare. She gave it anyway. He'd cried, a little, standing at the counter, and before he left he'd grabbed an order ticket off the spike and turned it over and written on the back, pressing hard, "I owe you one honest life," and signed it with his initials. A.V. He said he'd never forget it. He said someday he'd pay her back. She'd laughed and told him to stop being dramatic and just make his bus. He made his bus. And she never saw him again. She never learned his last name past those 2 letters. She never found out if he got into that school, or became whatever he dreamed of becoming, or forgot her the moment the town dropped behind the bus window. Life went on. Her mother got sick. The years piled up. The only thing that ever came back was the card. Every December, one card signed, A. She'd wondered sometimes in the quiet if it was him. But she'd never let herself be sure, because being sure meant hoping, and Diane had long ago stopped hoping the world owed her anything. She sat on the cot with the ticket in her hands, and she thought about that young man for the first time in years. And something in her, something that had been bent low all week, straightened just a little. Not a plan. Diane didn't make plans like that. She didn't think, someone will come save me. She wasn't waiting for a rescue. It was smaller than that, and quieter. It was just this, that she had done right by a stranger once, expecting nothing, and the memory of it was still clean. Still hers. Nobody could take that off the deed. Craig could have the house. He couldn't have that. She folded the ticket back up, slid it into the Bible, and finally slept. The days after the funeral settled into a strange, hollow rhythm. Diane still opened the diner every morning before dawn, because the diner was hers at least, and the work held her together. She slept in the back. She fed the town. She kept the card up on the register even though it was July, and no new one was due for months. It was company, somehow. And then one afternoon, in the slow hour after lunch, a young man came in off the road. He was maybe 23. Dusty from traveling, a backpack slung over one shoulder, the tired look of someone who'd been moving for days and sleeping cheap. He slid onto a stool at the counter and studied the menu a long time. Diane knew the look. She'd know that look anywhere. It was the same look, 24 years later, worn by a different face. The young man ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of soup. And Diane watched him do the math in his head, watched him decide against the sandwich he actually wanted. And she made up her own mind on the spot. She brought him the soup, and then she brought him a burger and fries he hadn't ordered, and a slice of pie, and set it all down in front of him. "I only ordered the soup," he said. "Kitchen made too much," Diane said, which wasn't true. "You'd be doing me a favor." He ate like a young man who hadn't eaten right in a while. When he finished, he dug into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills, smoothing them flat on the counter, counting carefully. Diane put her hand over the money and pushed it gently back toward him. "Put that away," she said. "It's on the house." "Ma'am, I can't. You can. Sit, have another coffee." "Where are you headed?" His name was Tom's Ruiz. He told her he was working, sort of, doing field work for a political campaign, driving from town to town, knocking on doors, and that the money was thin and the road was long. He was passing through Coldwater Bend, on his way to the next county over. He'd just stopped because he was hungry, and the sign said Ruthie's, and something about it looked warm. Diane refilled his coffee and let him talk. She liked him. He had a good, tired, honest face. And while he talked, his eyes wandered over the diner the way a traveler's eyes do, over the old photos on the wall, over the pie case. And they landed on the card, propped up on the register. "The one with the strange little signature. That's a nice card," Tom said. "Somebody special?" Diane glanced at it and gave her small private smile. "Comes every December. 24 years now, never a return address. Just sign the one letter." She shrugged. "I've never known who sends it." Tom's looked at the card a moment longer than you'd expect. Something in his face flickered, the way a face does when a thing snags at the edge of memory and it can't quite say why. Then his eye caught something else. Diane had been holding the old order ticket, turning it over in her fingers without thinking, the way she'd taken to doing since the funeral. She set it down on the counter to pour his coffee, and Tom's saw the back of it. The handwriting. The 7 pressed in words. "I owe you one honest life. A.V." He read it. She saw him read it. He didn't say anything, but something went very still and careful behind his eyes. "Somebody owe you a life?" he asked, light, joking, but watching her closely now. Diane laughed and slid the ticket back into her apron pocket. "A young man, a long time ago. Stranger passing through, like you. I fed him a winter and gave him bus money for an interview." She wiped the counter. "Never saw him again. He wrote that on his way out the door. Kids are dramatic." She smiled. "You want more pie? You've got to drive." "Yes, ma'am," Tom said quietly. I think I do. She cut him another slice and he ate it slow. And he asked her, careful, easy, a few more questions than a stranger usually asks. Her name. How long she'd had the place. Whether things were all right. Because he'd noticed the cot in the back through the doorway. And a woman who owns a diner doesn't usually sleep in it. Diane, who never told anybody her troubles, found herself telling this kind young man a little. Just a little. That there'd been some family trouble. That she'd lost the house. That she was getting by. Tom's nodded and didn't push. But when he finally stood to leave, he did something odd. He asked if he could take a picture of the card by the register. My grandma collects them, he said, which wasn't the real reason. And Diane, who had nothing to hide, said sure, and he took a photo of the little card and its one-letter signature. Then he shouldered his backpack and paused at the door. Ms. Mercer, he said, thank you. Not just for the food, for the way you did it. He tapped his chest like he was pointing at something. I'll remember it. Go on, Diane said, waving him off with a dish towel. The way she'd waved off a young man 24 years before and didn't think a thing of it. Drive safe. The bell over the door rang as Tom's Ruiz stepped out into the afternoon, and Diane went back to wiping her counter, alone in the quiet diner, with no idea at all what she'd just set in motion. Because Tom sat in his car in the gravel lot for a long time before he started the engine. He pulled out his phone, he looked at the photo he'd taken of the card, and then he opened his messages, and he scrolled up to a name near the top. His boss's office. The people who signed his thin paychecks. He started to type. Then stopped. Then started again. There was a name he worked under, a man whose face was on posters in 3 states. A man whose story, the one they told at every rally, the one Tom's had heard 100 times, started the same way. A young man. A dead bus ticket. A cold winter in a nowhere town. A woman at a diner counter who fed him for nothing and asked for nothing back. Tom's had always thought it was just a story. The kind politicians tell. He'd never really believed there was a real diner, a real winter, a real woman. He looked at the card again, at the one letter and the dot. And then he looked up the name of the town he was sitting in, just to be sure he had it right for the message. Coldwater Bend, Ohio. His thumb hovered over the phone. His heart was going faster now. Somewhere 2 states away, in an office lined with flags, there was a man who had spent 24 years mailing a card he never signed his full name to, because he'd never been able to find the woman who'd earned it, and had never stopped looking. Tom's Ruiz took a breath, and he began to type the message that was going to reach him. The message reached Washington a little after 4 o'clock. It landed on a screen in an office lined with flags, in a building where the phones never fully stopped. Marcus Reyes read it twice. Then he read it a 3rd time, slower, the way a man reads something he already knows is going to change his afternoon. A field staffer in Ohio. A diner off the county road. A woman named Diane. A card signed with 1 letter. A ticket with a man's handwriting on the back. Marcus had worked for the senator for 9 years. He had heard the story at every rally, the bus money that ran out, the cold town, the woman at the counter who fed a broke kid for a whole winter and never once made him feel like a charity case. He'd always half believed it was polished a little. Everybody's origin story got polished. He stood up. He walked down the hall. He knocked once on a door and opened it without waiting. "Senator," he said, "I think we found her." Andre Vance was 46 years old. He had shaken the hands of 2 presidents. He had given speeches that made grown men cry and grown women write checks. He looked up from his desk with the mild, tired patience of a man who got interrupted 40 times a day. "Found who?" Coldwater Bend, Marcus said. "Ohio, a diner called Ruthie's." And the senator went still. Not the practiced stillness he used on camera. A real one. The kind that starts in the chest and works outward. His hand, which had been holding a pen, set the pen down very carefully, as if it had suddenly become something that could break. "Say the name again," he said quietly. "Ruthie's." The woman's name is Diane. Diane Mercer. For a long moment, the senator didn't speak. His eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere with snow in it, and the smell of coffee and hot grease, and a woman in an apron sliding a plate across a counter and telling a scared 22-year-old to eat before it got cold. "Get me everything," he said. Quietly, tonight, 2 states away, Diane Mercer was mopping her floor and had no idea any of it was happening. She'd had a strange, tired week, the kind that sits on your shoulders. Craig had called twice about the 30 days, reminding her the clock was running, as if she could forget. The developer's sign was already staked in the front yard of her mother's house. She'd driven past it once, on purpose, just to look at it, and then had not driven past it again. She wrung out the mop and set it in the bucket. Outside the window, the light was going gold the way it did at the end of a July day. She thought about her mother. She thought about the quilts in her car trunk, which she still hadn't brought inside, because bringing them inside made it real. She did not think about a senator. Why would she? But the machine had already started to turn. Marcus Reyes did his work the way he always did, carefully, lawfully, without noise. By the next morning, he had a paralegal pulling the county records. By the afternoon, he had them in front of him, and something in the paperwork made him lean forward and reach for his phone. Because the deed on the Mercer house was wrong. Not morally wrong. He'd expected morally wrong. This was something better. This was legally wrong. The quitclaim that moved the house to Craig and Sharon had been signed in a hospital room. Marcus had seen 100 of those. But the signature line for the witness was a problem, and the date was a bigger problem. Because by the date on that document, Ruth Mercer's dementia diagnosis was already in her medical record, already filed, already known. A woman cannot legally sign away a house she no longer has the capacity to understand she owns, and the witness who was supposed to swear she understood it wasn't a competent witness at all. Marcus sat back in his chair. He allowed himself, for just a second, a small, hard smile. "Well," he said to the empty office, "isn't that something?" He picked up the phone and called the senator. Meanwhile, in Coldwater Bend, Craig Mercer was in a hurry. Craig was always in a hurry now. The strip mall on Route 9 had eaten him alive. $96,000 underwater, and the bank calling, and his wife asking questions he didn't want to answer. The house was the plug. Sell the house, fill the hole, and nobody ever had to know how close to the edge he'd been standing. He'd found a developer, a clean cash buyer who wanted the lot for townhouses and didn't care about the history of it. Closing was set for Friday, 4 days out. Craig could almost feel the money. He was at his kitchen table with the paperwork spread out when his phone buzzed. It was Denny from the county title office. Craig and Denny had gone to high school together. "Craig," Denny said. "Weird one for you. Somebody from out of state's been asking about the Mercer property. The house. Records request. Official looking. Washington." Craig frowned. "Washington? D.C. Washington. Some office. Probably nothing. Probably a title glitch. One of them automated things. But I figured I'd tell you on account of the closing." Craig laughed. It came out easy. "Denny, nobody in Washington cares about a house in Coldwater Bend. It's a computer somewhere hiccuping. Forget it." "Yeah," Denny said. "That's what I figured." Craig hung up. He did not think about it again. That was Craig's whole life, really, a series of small warnings he laughed off because looking at them straight would have cost him something. He went back to his paperwork and thought about Friday. Diane spent that week packing. There wasn't much left to pack, honestly. The house had already been picked over at the estate sale. Her whole childhood folded onto card tables and sold to strangers for whatever a stranger would pay. What was left was hers. Her clothes, her mother's Bible, the quilts, a few boxes of the odds and ends of a life. She was in the diner's back room, taping a box shut, when the bell over the front door rang. She looked up, expecting a customer. It was Ellen Foss. Ellen was 71. She'd buried her husband 4 winters back. and she was standing in the doorway of Ruthie's with her purse clutched in both hands, and a look on her face like she'd made up her mind about something on the drive over. "Ellen," Diane said. "We're not really open, hun. I know," Ellen said. "I didn't come to eat. I came to help you pack." Diane stopped with the tape gun in her hand. "Ellen, you don't have to do that." Diane Mercer. Ellen set her purse on the counter and rolled up the sleeves of her cardigan. "The winter after Harold passed, I couldn't get out of bed. You know what you did? You brought me supper. 3 nights a week, all winter, in a foil pan, and you never once let me thank you for it. You just set it on the porch and knock and be gone by the time I got to the door." Diane looked at the floor. "That was nothing." "It wasn't nothing to me," Ellen said. "Now where are your boxes?" And before Diane could argue, the bell rang again, and there was Walt Kubiak filling up the doorway, cap in his hands. Walt had run the garage on 2nd Street until the chain place opened out by the highway and put him under. He was a big, quiet man, with grease worn so deep into his knuckles it never fully washed out. He and Diane had never been close, exactly. But 2 Christmases back, when his shop went dark, an envelope had shown up in his mailbox with enough in it to cover his December, and no name on it. He'd always had a feeling about where it came from. He'd never asked, because asking would have meant she'd have to lie to him, and he didn't want to make her do that. "Heard you were moving things," Walt said. "Brought my truck." Diane looked at the 2 of them standing in her mother's diner, Ellen with her sleeves rolled up, Walt with his cap in his hands, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 2 weeks came loose, just a little. "I can't pay anybody," she said, and her voice wasn't quite steady. "Did we ask you for money?" Ellen said. Walt grabbed that end. They worked till dark. And Diane, who had spent her whole life being the one who fed people and asked for nothing, sat for 1 strange hour on an overturned crate and let 2 people she'd quietly carried carry her instead. She didn't know how to do it. She kept getting up to help. Ellen kept telling her to sit down. It was the closest she'd come to crying since the funeral. But it didn't fix anything. That was the hard part. Kindness came back to sit with her in that room, and it was warm, and it mattered. And it did not change the fact that on Friday morning a stranger was going to sign a check, and her mother's house was going to belong to a company that wanted to knock it down. That truth sat in the corner all night like a cold draft. On Thursday, her neighbor Paul stopped by. Paul meant well. Paul always meant well. "Diane," he said, "you have got to get a lawyer. You can't just let them take it. That's your mother's house. You nursed her. 8 years. There's got to be something a lawyer could do." Diane wiped down the counter she'd already wiped twice. "With what money, Paul?" she said. It wasn't a question. "I've got a diner that clears just enough to keep the lights on. I gave my savings to my mother's care. 8 years of it. A lawyer costs more than I've made this whole year. And even if I had it." She set the rag down. "What would I say? That my brother tricked a sick woman into signing a paper? I've got no proof of what was in that hospital room. It was him and her and a notary. My word against a piece of paper with a signature on it. Judges believe paper, Paul, not tired women who run diners." Paul didn't have an answer for that. "Some things you don't get to win," Diane said, more gently. "You just get to keep your dignity while you lose them. That's the only part that's up to me." She said it steady. But steady is its own kind of hurt. Anybody watching her fold that rag would have felt it. That was the low point. Thursday evening. The card that came every December sat on the register from last year, unopened in her mind because it wasn't December and there was no reason to think about it now. The house was as good as gone. She had made her peace with losing, the way she made her peace with everything. Quietly, alone, and without letting it show. She locked up the diner and went to sleep on the cot in the back room, under one of her mother's quilts. And she did not dream of anything at all. The phone rang at 9:12 the next morning, Friday, the morning of the closing. Diane was pouring coffee for the two truckers at the far booth when it rang. The number on the little screen had a 202 in front of it. She didn't know a soul in that area code. She almost let it go to nothing. She was busy. Her hands were full. But something made her set the pot down and pick it up. "Ruthie's," she said. "Miss Mercer?" A man's voice. Calm. Careful. "Diane Mercer?" "Speaking. My name is Marcus Reyes. I'm calling from Senator Vance's office." A small pause. "He's been trying to find you for a very long time." Diane stood very still behind her counter. The two truckers kept talking in their booth. The coffee steamed. The morning went on around her like nothing was happening. "I think you have the wrong Diane," she said. "I don't think I do," Marcus said. And there was something gentle in it now. "Ms. Mercer, 24 years ago, did you feed a young man at that diner? Through a winter? A young man who'd run out of bus money on his way to a law school interview?" The floor seemed to tilt very slightly under her feet. "Andre," she said, barely out loud. "His name was Andre." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. "It still is." She had to put her hand flat on the counter. The whole world had narrowed down to that little voice in her ear and the formica under her palm. "There's something else," Marcus said, "and I need you to sit down if you can, because it matters and it can't wait. We've reviewed the deed on your mother's house, the quitclaim your brother filed. How do you? That's my job, Ms. Mercer, and I'm going to tell you plainly, because you've been lied to enough. That deed is not valid. Your mother signed it after her dementia diagnosis was already in her medical record. The law calls that incapacity, and the person who witnessed her signature wasn't legally qualified to do it, which means the whole transfer is defective. A beat. It's void, Miss Mercer. It never legally moved the house at all. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She didn't. And then, all at once, she did. "The closing," she whispered. "There's a closing this morning. Craig's selling it." "Today?" "No," Marcus said, and for the first time there was steel under the comm. "He's not. There won't be any closing today. Our counsel filed this morning. The developer's title company already knows the deed is clouded. No honest buyer closes on a house with a defect like that. It stopped." Diane closed her eyes. 24 years. A card every December. One letter and a dot. A ticket in her mother's Bible with a stranger's handwriting on it. All of it coming back around. This morning. On the exact day she'd thought she was going to lose everything. "Ms. Mercer," Marcus said. "One more thing. The senator asked me to tell you he's on his way. He's about 90 minutes out. He asked me not to let anyone tell you the details of the deed until he could tell you the rest himself." A pause, and she could hear a smile in it now. Tired and real. "He's wanted to say it in person for a very long time." The bell over the door rang. Diane opened her eyes. Craig walked in. And behind him, Sharon. They didn't see her on the phone. They were mid-argument, the both of them, the way they always were now. Craig had a manila folder under his arm. Sharon had that sharp, bright look she wore when she was pretending everything was fine. "Because the title company's being difficult, that's all," Craig was saying. "Some paperwork thing. We'll sort it at the closing. Sharon, would you relax?" They'd come to the diner. Of all mornings. To wait out a delay they didn't understand. Maybe to get out of the house before the developer's people arrived. Maybe just because it was still, in their minds, a thing they owned. "I have to go," Diane said quietly into the phone. "They're here. We'll be there soon," Marcus said. And the line went dead. Craig dropped into a booth like he owned the place. "Coffee, Di, too. It's been a morning." She poured it. Her hands were perfectly steady. She was surprised by that. She set the cups down in front of them and said nothing. "Big day," Sharon said, not quite looking at her. She had her phone out, already photographing the last of the diner's shelves, still cataloging, still pricing things in her head that weren't hers. "You should be out of the house by tonight, Diane. The buyers want to walk it this weekend." "There won't be any walking it," Diane said. Sharon glanced up. Excuse me? Diane didn't answer. She just looked at the clock. And she waited. The next hour was the longest hour of her life, and the shortest. Craig made a call, and then another, his voice getting tighter each time. The title company wasn't returning his calls. The developer's agent showed up around 11, a slick young man in a good suit, and sat in his car in the gravel lot on his phone, and did not come inside, and did not look happy. At 11:40, a black SUV turned off the county road and rolled to a stop in front of Ruthie's. Diane saw it through the window. Her heart was going so hard she could feel it in her throat. A man got out of the back. Tall, silver coming in at the temples. A good coat. 46 years old and carrying himself like a man who'd had to learn how. One careful year at a time. He stood for a moment in the gravel lot and looked up at the sign, Ruthie's. The way a man looks at a place he'd thought about 1,000 times and never let himself come back to. Then he came inside, and the bell rang, and Andre Vance was standing in her mother's diner. Craig turned around in the booth, annoyed at the interruption, and then his face changed. Because even Craig watched the news. Even Craig knew that face. "Senator?" Craig said, half rising, already reaching for the smile he used on men more important than himself. Well, my goodness, what brings? Andre Vance walked right past him. He didn't stop. He didn't glance. He walked past Craig Mercer and past Sharon Mercer Doyle like they were empty booths. And he walked to the counter, and he stopped in front of Diane. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. She saw the boy in him. Under the good coat and the gray hair and the 24 years, she saw the shivering kid who'd sat at that counter blowing on his hands, too proud to ask and too hungry to leave. "You still have the same coffee pots," he said. His voice wasn't the speech voice. It was quieter than that. "I looked for them the second I walked in." "Same pots." "Andre," she said, "before you say anything." He held up one hand, gently. "Let me say it right. I've practiced it for a lot of years." He took a breath, and his eyes were wet, and he did not fight it. "I owe you one honest life. I wrote that on the back of an order ticket the last morning I sat here, because it was all I had to give you, and I meant every word, and I have spent the whole rest of my life trying to be worth it." Diane's hand went to her apron pocket, to the folded ticket she'd carried there since the night she found it in the Bible. She started to draw it out. "You don't have to show me," he said. "I know exactly what it says." Then he reached into his coat, and he took out his wallet, an ordinary worn wallet, and from inside it he drew out a single bill. It was old. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone soft. It had a strip of clear tape across one corner, where it had started to tear years ago, and he'd mended it rather than spend it. $40. He laid it on the formica between them. "You gave me this for a bus," Andre Vance said, "November that winter. You took it out of your own tip jar, and you pressed it into my hand, and you told me not to be too proud to make the interview. I've carried it 24 years. Through law school. Through every campaign. Every time I wanted to quit, or take the easy money, or forget where I came from, I've put my hand on this bill." His voice broke, just slightly, and he let it. "I never spent it, Diane, because the day I spend it is the day I've broken my word to you." The diner had gone absolutely silent. The two truckers had stopped talking. The developer's agent had come in at some point and was standing frozen by the door. And in the booth, Craig and Sharon Mercer sat with their coffee going cold in front of them, and their faces slowly, horribly, understanding the card by the register. The one that came every December, signed with one letter, A. Andre. Sharon's mouth had come open. Craig had gone the color of the underside of a fish. But Andre Vance wasn't talking to them. He turned around, slowly, and now his voice found the other register, the one that carried. Because there were people who needed to hear this, and he had waited a long time to say it in front of witnesses. Marcus had come in behind him. And behind Marcus, two people from the local paper and a woman with a camera, because Marcus Reyes never wasted a moment that mattered. "I want to say this plainly," the senator said, "so nobody has to guess at it later. 24 years ago, I was nobody. I was a broke kid with a dead bus ticket, and no name anybody in this town had ever heard. I had nothing. And this woman fed me every day from November to February and never once made me feel like I owed her for it. She gave me $40 she couldn't spare so I could make an interview I was too scared to go to. She didn't know what I'd become. Nobody did. There was nothing in it for her." He looked around the room, at every face. She fed a stranger who had nothing and asked for nothing back. That's the only credential that has ever mattered to me. Everything I am started at this counter. The camera clicked. The pen moved. And it was true, all of it, and it needed no help from anybody to do its work. Then Marcus Reyes stepped forward, and he was holding a folder of his own, and the work turned to the two people in the booth. "Mr. Mercer," Marcus said. Craig looked up like a man in a bad dream. "The quitclaim you filed on this property is void. Your mother signed it after her dementia diagnosis was already on record. That's a matter of medical documentation, and it's not in dispute. The signing lacked a competent witness. The transfer never legally occurred." Marcus set a single page on the table in front of Craig, face up, so the developer's agent by the door could see it too. "The house has never left your mother's estate, and under her actual will, the one that predates all of this, it passes to the child who cared for her." Nobody had to say which child. The developer's agent didn't wait for the rest. He was already turning, already reaching for the door, already on his phone to whoever he answered to. The clean cash sale, the plug for the $96,000 hole on Route 9, walked out of Ruthie's diner and got in a car and drove away, and everybody watched it go. Craig sat there with the voided deed in front of him and the whole room looking at him. 24 years he'd spent being the important one, the one whose name was on things, and it had all come down to this single page that said, in the flat language of the law, that he had tried to steal his sister's house from a dying woman, and the theft had never even worked. "Dee," he said. His voice had nothing left in it. "Die. Listen, don't," Diane said. "Not cruel. Just done. Not here." He had no money now, no sale. The hole on Route 9 was still $96,000 deep, and now it was $96,000 deep in front of the whole town, in front of a camera, with a United States Senator standing 10 feet away. He gathered up his folder with shaking hands, and he stood, and there was nothing left in the room for him. He walked out into the gravel lot, and he did not look back, because there was nothing behind him now but what he'd done. Then there was Sharon. Sharon had, in the middle of all of it, still been holding her phone. Still had a little price sticker in her other hand, the kind she'd been slapping on the last of the diner's things out of pure reflex, out of the habit of turning everything into a number. She looked at the phone. She looked at the camera pointed at her. She thought, you could see her think it, about how to spin this, how to be on the right side of it, how to make this a story about something other than what it was. She'd married up and out of the diner family. She'd built a whole self out of being better than where she came from. And there was no angle here. There was no version of this where she came out clean. The cameras were already rolling, and cameras don't take a bribe. She set the price sticker down on the counter, very slowly, and she set the phone down beside it. "Diane," she started. "You priced Mama's china at $8, Diane said quietly, her wedding china. $8, on a card table, in the yard. Sharon had nothing. For the first time in her life, Sharon Mercer Doyle had absolutely nothing to say. She got up, and she gathered her purse as she went out past the senator with her chin up and her face burning, and everyone let her go, because there was nothing to stop and nothing to add. The diner was quiet again. Diane looked down at the taped $40 bill on the counter, at the little price sticker Sharon had left. At the card by the register with its single letter. At the man standing in front of her, who used to be a shivering boy. She didn't make a speech. She wasn't a speech kind of woman. She reached under the counter, to the low shelf where she'd hidden the one thing she'd bought back from her own family's estate sale with money she didn't have, her mother's wedding china. She'd paid the $8 herself, quietly, so a stranger wouldn't take it. She set the plate on the counter, and she looked at it for a moment. Then she walked to the wall behind the register, where a pale rectangle showed on the paint. And she took a framed photograph out of her apron, she'd been carrying that too, and she hung her mother back up on the wall of the diner her mother had built. Ruth Mercer, young in front of a sign that said Ruthie's, squinting into a sun 40 years gone. There, Diane said softly. To the photo, not to the room. You're home. And that was all the revenge she took. That was the whole of it. The senator stayed for lunch. He sat at the counter, on the same stool, and Diane made him the same thing she'd made him that first winter, eggs and toast, and coffee that never stopped. And he ate it slow, and told her about the years. And she told him about her mother. And for a little while the diner was just a diner, and the two of them were just two people who'd once been kind to each other on a cold day. Before he left, he put his hand on the taped bill on the counter, and he slid it back toward her. Keep it, he said. It was always going to end up back in this jar. She shook her head and slid it back to him. You carry it, she said. You've got more years to be worth it than I do. I already know how mine turned out. He laughed, wet-eyed, and put it back in his wallet. And that was where it stayed. 6 months later, Ruthie's was busy at dawn. The bell over the door rang and rang. The county road crew came in for their coffee. Petey, the paper boy, got his usual too-big tip and his usual seat by the window on cold mornings. Ellen Foss came in on Tuesdays and would not let Diane comp her pie out of pride, which Diane understood better now than she used to. Walt Kubiak had steady work again. The story had put the town in the mood to fix its own cars close to home. Upstairs, in the house on the hill, the quilts were back on the beds. Ruth Mercer's china sat in the cabinet where it had sat for 50 years. Diane slept in her own room, in her own house, the one she had earned with 8 years of nights and a whole life of asking for nothing. Above the register, 2 things were pinned to the wall now. One was a $40 bill, a copy of it, framed, because the real one was still traveling the country in a senator's wallet. And beside it, the December card. Except this year, when it came, it wasn't signed with 1 letter and a dot. This year it was signed, in full, in a careful hand, Andre. Craig sold his own house that spring to cover the hole on Route 9. He and Diane don't speak, but the town knows the whole of it now, and a man reaps what he plants. Sharon sent a card at Christmas. Diane didn't answer it. But she didn't throw it out either. She keeps it in a drawer. Some doors you leave shut without locking. That's her way. And the ticket, the old order ticket, I owe you one honest life. In a young man's handwriting, Diane framed that one too, and hung it lowest of the 3, where she could see it from behind the counter. Because that was the whole secret of it, if there was a secret. She'd never done any of it to be repaid. She'd fed a hungry boy because he was hungry. She'd carried a widow because the widow was low. She tipped a paper kid because it was cold outside and he was small. She never kept a ledger. She never expected the world to. But the world keeps one anyway. Quietly, in its own hand. And it settles up in its own time, on its own strange schedule, sometimes 24 years late, on an ordinary Friday morning, in a diner off a county road, in a nowhere town. Kindness given for nothing isn't lost. It's just out walking. And one cold winter, when you've forgotten you ever set it loose, it comes back through the door with the bell on it, and it sits down at your counter, and it finally lets you know its name. So if you've got a diner in your town, a Ruthie's, a place run by somebody who feeds strays and never keeps score, go sit at the counter this week. Leave a good tip. And tell me in the comments what town you're in. Somebody there is quietly keeping the whole world afloat, one plate at a time. Let's not wait 24 years to say thank you.